Morality, Religion, and Justice, Chapter 12 in your cultural psychology text. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm not sure what that is, but it's a picture. Ethnocentrism leads people to assume that their own culture's ways are better or more natural than that of others. Ethnocentrism allowed Europeans to force their understanding of morality, religion, and justice on all the indigenous people they came across, all in the name of their definition of civilization. In 1971, Lawrence Kohlberg developed his stages of moral development. Level 1, pre-conventional level, Level 2, conventional level, and Level 3, post-conventional level. The pre-conventional moral reasoning suggests that people interpret morality based on a calculation of how much better or worse off they would be for acting in a certain way. Morality at this level is about trying to behave in a way that provides the best overall return. Conventional moral reasoning is about viewing actions as moral to the extent that they help maintain and facilitate the social order. This level dictates that morality is about following the rules, and individuals should not question where those rules come from. Post-conventional moral reasoning is based on the consideration of abstract ethical principles of what is right and wrong, and moral decisions are reached based on the logical extensions of those principles. Good behavior is seen as that which is consistent with a set of universal ethical principles that emphasize justice and individual rights. Is it right for her to drink beer when she is too young to drink? Snary in 1985 did a meta-analysis of the 27 cultural areas from around the world that had been tested using Kohlberg's parameters. There was some universality in moral reasoning. In all cultures, there were some adults who reasoned at the conventional levels, and in no cultural groups did the average adult reason at the pre-conventional level. Evidence of post-conventional moral reasoning was not universally found. Moral reasoning based on justice and individual rights. Every urban Western sample contained at least some individuals who showed reasoning based on justice and individual rights. Not a single person from the traditional tribal and village folk populations showed such reasoning. One reason for the discrepancy between traditional societies and more urbane Western societies may be because of the educational experiences of both societies. Traditional educational practices may not include the same ideas of justice and individual rights. Another explanation for the discrepancies between traditional and Western cultures is that the two types of cultures live in different environments. Because of the harsher environment, tribal and village populations have more concerns than justice and individual rights. Schrader and colleagues in 1977 argued that Kohlberg's model of moral reasoning only represented one of the three codes that people use for moral judgments around the world: the ethics of autonomy, the ethics of community, and the ethics of divinity. Schrader and his group referred to Kohlberg's model as an ethic of autonomy. The ethic views morality in terms of individual freedom and rights violations. An act is seen as immoral under the ethic of autonomy when it directly hurts another person or infringes on another's rights and freedoms as an individual. A second code of ethics that Schrader and colleagues proposes is an ethic of community, which emphasizes that individuals have duties that conform with their roles in a community or social hierarchy. According to this code, there is an ethical principle to uphold one's interpersonal duties and obligations toward others. Actions are seen as wrong when individuals fail to perform their duties. A third code that Schrader and colleagues suggested was an ethic of divinity, which is concerned with sanctity and the perceived natural order of things. This code contains the ethical principle that one is obligated to preserve the standards mandated by a transcendent authority. Actions are seen as immoral if they cause impurity or degradation to oneself or others, or if one shows any disrespect for God or God's creations. And that's what this is. This is actually demonstration against a rape in India. It was one of the it was a rape by of a 13-year-old girl. The men that raped her because they considered her immoral, and since she was immoral, they needed to punish her. So they raped her and murdered her. And of course, these women were complaining. The reason she was immoral was because she wasn't a virgin. And she was also of a different religious group than they were. So they raped and murdered her. And of course, the women are complaining or demonstrating against it. German sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies argued that there are two ways that people can relate to each other in a group. Gemeinschaft is community relationships bind people together with the social glue of concord, and Gesellschaft, people act as individuals and have weak binds with society. Gemeinschaft groups are characteristic of small folk group organizations, and within these groups, interpersonal relationships play an especially important role. People feel connected to one another because they feel a unity of spirit. The relationships are central to the individual's identity. Obligations associated with one's Gemeinschaft carry weight of full moral obligations. Gesellschaft are groups that are characteristic of modern Western societies and treat relationships as imaginary and instrumental as a means of an end to an end. Gesellschaft groups are perceived as relatively impersonal and somewhat contractual, which leads to the necessity of justice obligations to govern disputes between individuals. So in Gemeinschaft, controversy between individuals would be taken care of by the community. In Gesellschaft, it has to be taken care of by the government. In Gesellschaft groups, individuals can't be expected always to behave in pro-social ways toward others because they have strong obligations toward them. So formalized rules are necessary to keep people in line. People the world over feel a moral obligation to their community. Objective obligations, people believe they have an obligation to act in a certain way, even if there is no official rule or law that requires them to do so. Legitimately regulated people should be prevented from engaging in a moral violation, or they should be punished if they act in such a way. Ethic of divinity involves a moral code respecting the sanctity of natural order of things as dictated by a transcendent moral authority. Immoral actions are perceived to violate the natural order of things. Hunter in 1991 proposed that a culture war exists in the United States and that the battle lines are drawn between those who have an impulse toward orthodoxy and those who have an impulse toward progressivism. Religious adherents who are orthodox are committed to the idea of a transcendent authority. This authority is viewed to have existed long before humans and is operating independently of people. This authority is believed to be more knowledgeable and more powerful than all of the human experience. In the Orthodox view, this transcendent authority created a moral code and revealed it to human beings in sacred texts. The moral code is perceived to stand across all times and circumstances and should not be altered to accommodate any social changes or individual differences. Individuals and society are expected to adapt themselves to this ordained moral code. Adherents of progressive religions emphasize the importance of human agency in understanding and formulating a moral code. Progressivists reject the view that a transcendent authority reveals itself and its will to humans. They believe that humans play an integral role in the formulation of moral codes. Progressivists believe that because social circumstances change, the moral code must change along with them. In 2007, Haidt and Graham expanded Schrader's 3 moral ethics by expanding it to 5. Avoid harm, protect fairness, be loyal to your in-group, respect hierarchy, and achieve purity. And this is Haidt, and this is Graham. Avoid harm. People are sensitive to any behaviors that cause harm to others. Protect fairness. They attend closely to whether resources or rights are distributed in a fair way. Loyalty to their in-groups. People are motivated to identify with their in-groups, make sacrifices for their in-groups, trust in-group members more than they trust out-group members. Respect hierarchy. People tend to respect hierarchy by admiring their superiors and believing subordinates need to act in accordance with the wishes of authority figures. Achieve purity, reflecting the ethic of divinity. People are motivated to achieve purity and are disgusted at behaviors ruled by carnal passions, such as lust or gluttony, or by behaviors that suggest contamination of any kind. There is a greater emphasis on faith in Christianity, especially Protestantism, than in Judaism. Membership in Judaism is defined by descent. Traditionally, one becomes Jewish by being born to a Jewish biological mother. While Christianity is based on beliefs, traditional Judaism emphasizes particular practices, such as keeping kosher by avoiding certain foods like pork. Protestant sect membership is primarily defined by beliefs. One cannot become a member of a church until one publicly accepts the Christian faith as dictated by a specific church and is thus baptized into that church. Christianity has fewer practices and instead places more emphasis on one's private communications with God. Reflecting the differential emphasis on practices and beliefs, a survey asked Jewish and Protestant participants how important practices and beliefs were for being religious. The results revealed that Jewish participants rated practices as more important than beliefs for being religious, whereas Protestants put greater emphasis on beliefs than practices. Jewish and Protestant participants were asked to evaluate a story of a married man contemplating having an affair with a woman in his office. All participants viewed extramarital liaisons as immoral, but the Protestants saw thinking about having an affair as sinful as having an affair. The Jewish participants limit their moral domain to what people do and not what they think. Distributing resources, and actually this came up in a presidential election. It was Jimmy Carter versus Gerald Ford back in 1976. Jimmy Carter did an interview with Playboy, and he said he had lusted in his heart, and because of that, there were some evangelical Christians that thought that Jimmy Carter was immoral, was sinful. And of course, everybody else is going, so you thought about having sex with somebody else? So what? And of course, but evangelical Christians were very much against it. And he actually won votes probably by saying that in the Playboy interview. Of course, you don't have Playboy anymore, and they certainly wouldn't do interviews. Hugh Hefner has died, lived into his 90s. Distributing resources, you could distribute resources by the principle of need, which dictates that resources are directed to those who need them the most. Distributed resources, principles of equality, dictates that resources should be shared equally among members of a group. Distributing resources, principles of equity states that resources are distributed based on an individual's contributions. The more an individual produces, the more resources they receive. Distributing resources, a social system that rewards individuals on the basis of equity principle, is known as a meritocracy. And meritocracies tend to be more common in individualistic societies. They can lead workers to be highly motivated to work hard because their earnings depend on their efforts. When one worker does well, other workers tend to do worse. Meritocratic systems tend to breed competition among workers, and that seems to be something that managers are trying to do. When I was working in a pumps and parts factory in Muncie, Indiana, and they gave me a part to run. They gave me a part to run, and it was I was being paid by the part. So every time I finished one of these parts, I got paid a certain amount of money. So as I'm going along, I'm going, wow, I can make lots of these things. And so here I'm just pumping them out like crazy. And so one of the union guys came to me and he said, "Hey, look, you need to slow down because you're doing too many of these. And if you do lots of these, then they're going to raise the number of parts you have to make for each part." So I was making, I don't know, 10 cents a part. And if I did it too many, if I made too many of them, then what would happen would be I'd make a lot of money. But the other thing that would happen is that they, instead of getting 10 cents a part, they would change it to 8 cents a part or 5 cents a part. And that's what he was worried about. But of course, I was just worried about making money. So what happened was after I made parts for about 15 minutes, they shut my line down, and I went and took a break for 45 minutes. And then when I came back, of course, I had another basket. But the union had shut me down. The union had decided that I was making too many parts. And that's what a meritocratic uh, system is all about, as weird as that is. Distributing resources in some organizations, it raises are distributed by longevity. So the longer you're there, and that's the way the military is. The longer you've been in the military, the more money you make. Why? Because now all of a sudden, instead of a private, you're a sergeant because you've been there long enough to be a sergeant. So it has to do with the seniority system. This is known as a seniority system. Seniority systems follow the principle of equality because there is no competition between workers. Pay is determined using the same formula for everybody, and that's the way it is in the military. You're paid by what rank you are and by how long you've been in that rank, or how long you've been in the service, actually. It is often assumed that merit-based pay is the way to ensure the greatest amount of effort from one's employees. However, Japanese workers have traditionally been among the hardest working in the world. There tends to be a great deal of voluntary overtime, and many workers never take their vacations. And Japanese companies tend to have more seniority-based pay than American organizations. They actually sleep at their desks. And as you can see, he's asleep, and he's asleep, and he's asleep, and he may be asleep. But this guy's, yeah, we got 3 people that are asleep. Social scientists have developed various economic games to measure people's sense of fairness. In the coin flip scenario, you are given $100 that has been given to you instead of another person by means of a coin flip. You can give the other person any portion of the $100, but they will never know who you are. So what do you do? Okay. So what do? You get $100. You got $100. You can keep the whole 100 if you want. Is that what you want to do? This is known as a dictator game, and there are various outcomes. The economic theory dictates that the rational person will give their invisible partner nothing because they will never know who you are and you don't stand to gain anything from them. So you're not going to gain anything from them. The idea is that you don't gain anything from them. And for that reason, why would you give up any of the money? You'll just keep it all. That's why it's the dictator game. You're the dictator. Curiously, the economic theory almost never happens. People around the world feel that keeping all the money for themselves is not right, and it just seems fair to give the other person some money. The most common decision that people make is a 50-50 split. As weird as that is, even though the other guy has no clue where the $50 is coming from. When economists found out that even Western college students were making irrational decisions in the dictator game by giving away money that would not benefit them, they sought an explanation. This did not fit any economic models that they had developed. And this is one of the reasons why business and psychology do not mix, because psychology is based on how people think and how they feel, and business is based on profits. Ouch. A surprise to everyone, should people in the United States average the highest amount of money to the invisible partner in the dictator game at $47. Factors that dictated the concept of fairness included the amount of calories negotiated at market for food and being a member of a world religion, Christianity and Islam, where God observes one's fairness. And of course, this is a picture of a man peeing in the ocean, and there's the face of God getting angry at him for urinating in the ocean. All the fishes do it. Another game is the public goods game. A group of 4 people are given $10 each. If the individuals donate all their money into a common pool, they are rewarded with 1.6 times the pot, or $64, and each person gets $16. However, if one person holds out their $10, the pot only ends up with $48, and they will each get $12. The free rider now has $22. As the number of rounds increased, the researchers found that the group made less and less money because the temptation to be a free rider was just too great. Because of this, the researchers decided to add a new factor to the game. The player could now pay $1 of their own money and have one of the free riders forfeit $3. The players seemed perfectly willing to pay their own money to get another player punished. The researchers found that with the punishment rule, cooperation increased quite dramatically and remained stable across time. The researchers proposed that a key factor that allowed human cooperation to evolve was people's willingness to engage in this kind of altruistic punishment. By feeling motivated to punish those who weren't cooperating, people were able to ensure that group members didn't free ride, which allowed humans to develop norms for cooperation and for large societies to flourish. When the public goods game was played around the world, altruistic punishment was practiced. However, in addition to the tendency for altruistic punishment, in many societies, people showed strong tendencies for what researchers called antisocial punishment. So now we have 2 different kinds of punishment: altruistic punishment that bring people back into line, and now antisocial punishment. The researchers found that some people were willing to pay their own money to punish another player, even if that player was cooperating. And this is what they call antisocial punishment. The motivation for this antisocial punishment seemed to be largely a function of revenge, in which people would punish a player who had punished them on a previous round. Although this tendency for antisocial punishment was negligible in weird societies, in other societies this behavior predominated. And of course, weird societies are Western societies. Antisocial punishment dominates in Oman more than any other country. Antisocial punishment predominates in Greece as the second highest level measured. Antisocial punishment predominates in Saudi Arabia as the third highest level measured. Antisocial punishment predominates in Russia as the fourth highest level measured. The notion that punishment promotes cooperation holds true only in societies characterized by norms for civic cooperation and high levels of trust. Antisocial punishment was entirely unexpected by the researchers who first discovered it, but it appears to be quite commonplace in many cultures, and it remains somewhat puzzling. The researchers' data show that societies with weaker norms for civic cooperation and a weaker rule of law engaged in more antisocial punishment in the public goods game. Other researchers argue that antisocial punishment can be adaptive in contexts where the rule of law is insufficient. In dealing with a system that can't always be trusted to function, people come up with alternative ways to ensure that their needs are met. In Brazil, there is a complex sociocultural strategy termed Yatimbo, by which people manipulate or dodge the official rules to achieve things. And this is a picture from Brazil. So cheating is common enough that they make them create these headpieces with sheets of paper so they can't look at anybody else's paper. Look at that. The whole room is full of people with these strange headbands. A real-life example of these weaker norms for civic cooperation can be seen in the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? In the show, which was originally created in England, in the United Kingdom, contestants are able to use a lifeline and can poll the studio audience for help in answering a difficult question. Of course, it has come to the United States, and you may have seen it. I don't think it's on anymore, but Who Wants to Be a Millionaire had Regis Philbin, who has since died. I don't think it's on television anymore. Anyway, when Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was introduced in Russia, the contestants quickly found out that they couldn't trust the audience. Frequently, the audience members would deliberately choose the wrong answer in an apparent effort to mislead the contestants. Not unlike the public goods game, many members of the Russian audience seemed to be more motivated to sabotage the play of the contestants than to help them. As the Brafman brothers have said, after a collapse of the Soviet Union, Russians became suspicious of those who were trying to profit off the hard work of others. Norms of civic cooperation remain relatively low in Russia and many other societies around the world, which makes it more difficult for governments to band citizens together in cooperative ventures. This is a picture of a member of a band called Pussy Riot. They make music that is not appreciated by the Russian hierarchy. They protest with their music, and this is an individual that was arrested. This is a female police officer, and she's been arrested and she's being taken to prison. She spent 2 years in prison for protesting, and there's what they look like. This is when the World Cup was in Russia. This is a member of Pussy Riot. And this is them. They wear these masks so nobody can tell who they are. And there they are giving an impromptu concert at the Red Square. You can listen to their music there. It's pretty interesting. There we go. Anyway, I was going to play some of it, but it's copyrighted. So I couldn't. Okay, next week we'll finish up with physical health and mental health, and that'll be the last